This is HighIntensityBusiness.com with Lawrence Neal, helping you achieve your health and fitness goals. Become a great personal trainer and build your high-intensity strength training business.
Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to HighIntensityBusiness.com. Today's guest is William Edgar Jones. William is the youngest son of Nautilus inventor Arthur Jones. William worked for Nautilus until shortly after Arthur had sold the business, and then worked for Arthur at MedX. Since MedX was sold, William has worked various jobs as well as freelance work as a photographer, and recently publishing Nautilus, The Lost Empire of Arthur Jones, and his first science fiction book, Tales of Frozen Sleep. William was Arthur's sole heir when he died. William, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
It's good to talk to you, sir.
Good stuff. No, I've been looking forward to this interview with you for a while. I was really fortunate to have you reach out, and really enjoyed the book, the Nautilus book. Very interesting, and really, enjoyed getting a kind of behind the scenes of, the life of Arthur Jones and his family and the business. So I've got a whole lot of questions I would love to ask you. So my first question is what was the impetus behind writing this book? Why did you write it?
Well, part of it had to do with setting the story straight in some cases. For example, a lot of people thought that any gem that was mentioned the name Nautilus in their title or as the name of the business was owned and operated by Nautilus, which was totally incorrect. Part of it was kind of a cathartic, if that's the right way to pronounce that word, process, because of having lived through the experiences of working there and working with Arthur's. And that was very intense.
Right. Okay. So putting the record straight, making sure that the Nautilus gyms weren't necessarily, people understood they weren't owned by Arthur Jones and the Nautilus company. And then just making it clear to people this was actually what was going on within the Nautilus business. So what were you hearing from people then that wasn't true? What were some of the rumors that you were hearing from people?
Well, like I say, the first thing that occurred, especially when he owned it, was the fact that people would actually operate businesses using the Nautilus name. And that was just, Arthur's regretted letting that genie out of the bottle. A lot of people have mentioned that they've worked with or for Nautilus. They've mentioned they've worked with or for Arthur. Some of those people I'd never heard of. I've checked with Liza, who has a better memory for names, and she'd never heard of him either. So there's a number of people out there that say they were associated with the business or they helped Arthur start the business. And frankly, they're totally bullshit artists.
Right. Okay. And that's interesting, because obviously you give such a detailed write-up about, exactly how the business progressed, how it grew, who was involved, who were the key players, in order to help, I guess, put the record straight in that regard. So I'd love to kind of start off talking a little bit about the early days. I have split this podcast up into sections of things I want to talk about, but I figured I'd try and do it. Well, I'm probably not going to do it in a chronological order, but it just makes sense for me to start here. So I'd love to hear what it was like, what your childhood was like. What was it like being, obviously all of us have seen, Arthur Jones and the interviews he's done, and you can see them all on YouTube these days. And he's just such a character. A lot of people despise, how he comes across it, and some people seem to love it. It's very much kind of he's got almost like a Marmite characteristic to him. You either love him or hate him. So tell me, what was it like being, what was your childhood like?
Well, it was a lot different than the old classic American television, the Leave It to Beaver type shows. The Arthur was a strict disciplinarian. He expected a lot of all of the children. My older brother, Gary, my older sister, Yaya, and me. So we were brought up in an age that these days would not be accepted. So swatting somebody on the ass for misbehaving these days gets the parent sent to jail. Swatting somebody on the ass back then was what was expected. And all of us received swats that we definitely had coming to us. We also were told at a young age that we were more intelligent than the average bear. And from what I've seen, I've got to agree with Arthur, at least to some extent, that was correct. It was not the easiest, perhaps, of way to get raised. We moved from the United States to Africa and lived there for 2 years, which was a lot different than living here in the United States. One of my private hates is against ties, and that was because the school system in Africa required all the students to wear a tie. I will go to great lengths to avoid wearing a tie. But Arthur loved his children, and there was no doubt about that. But it was a strict love. It was a disciplinarian type. And as long as you towed the line, you were fine.
Yeah, there is something admirable about that. I mean, I get you. It's frowned upon, a lot of the stuff you mentioned now, and it's a shame in a way because I definitely think parenting could do with a little bit more discipline in the mix. It's hard for me to imagine Arthur being loving just because of what we see, what I see online. Now it's interesting. So you say there with great confidence that he loved all his children. How did he show, because he was such a disciplinarian, how was he able to show that love to you and your siblings?
Well, one great example I can think of, and it's going to sound strange to most people, is when we were in Africa once, we went to one of the ranger posts out in the bush. So we're walking around as children with him, and he's carrying on his hip or in a holster a .44 Magnum. So as we're walking around, a warthog bolted out of a hole. He drew that gun so damn fast. I have no memory of the gun coming out of the holster. It was in the holster and was in his hand pointing at the mama warthog. If she had charged, he'd have shot her right then and there. She fortunately went the other way for her. So he was protective of us. He loved us, and he was not going to let us get maimed or even killed by a wild animal. We were the ones that were stupid, wandering too close to the warthog's nest. So right there, that showed his immediate love for us. It's a very visual thing in my mind. He would not let us be, fall into that kind of danger to get destroyed and get killed. I know it sounds strange to most people, but that's, to me, is a way of showing that love.
Yeah, I understand that. So, he showed it through his actions, through being protective. Did he ever use, because this is the thing I struggle to see, would he use words of affirmation? Like, would he say, he loved his kids very much to them, or was it more, like you say, in actions?
It was more in the actions. Verbally wise, not the kind of thing that he would express that much. It was not his style, and you understood that. It's not the way that it is depicted on TV with the number of families there, but you knew that you were loved. You knew you were protected. You knew you were cared for, and you didn't have to have him say it. You could just feel it. I don't know how to describe it beyond that.
No, I understand. I understand what you mean. It's far more compelling actions are much more powerful than words. So I get what you mean. And I suppose it's sort of partly a generational thing, maybe. I don't know whether back then, parents were, as I said, there's this greater sense of disciplinarianism going around, and there was less of that kind of words of affirmation as opposed to what it's like now. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying maybe that's the way it was as part of that too. Would you say?
Well, part of it would be that. I know also from talking with my biological mother, and let me tell you, Mother's Day was fun because the number of different wives Arthur had. But with my biological mother, she talked about how Arthur, to express his love with her, tended to be more a case of, here's money, go buy this that you want. Here's money, go buy that you want. He wouldn't so much use the words that I love you as give you money, in her particular case, so that she could get what she wanted. And that was just a different way of him showing it. Verbally wise, I know that he ran away from home, and it could be that he spent so much time away from home when he was a younger child that he did not have that way of expressing it with saying it.
So, Arthur Jones is well known for obviously being a genius, a brilliant man. Read his parents were doctors, weren't they? And, he read all the medical textbooks. And I heard a rumor, and this could be wrong, that he actually would study cadavers and you guys would occasionally find body parts in the freezer. Is that true?
Well, there were body parts in the freezer. My sister is a OBGYN up in New Jersey. So when she was going to medical school, we had body parts. We also had body parts for purposes of being studied for designing machines. So when you reached into the freezer, you did want to be careful to make sure you pulled out the TV dinner and not somebody's leftover arm.
Surely they would be put in separate sections, though, right?
Oh, well, I mean, it was quite obvious, but it could be funny at times. And if you didn't want to send a guest to the freezer to get something, they might be a little negative in their response.
Well, did you ever have a fright? When you first opened the freezer and you saw that, was there ever a surprise to you when you first saw that?
I don't remember.
Or were you warned?
Ever. I don't particularly remember ever being frightened by opening the freezer and seeing something. I think that most of the body parts that were in the freezer, they were wrapped where they weren't obvious, particularly what they were. So if you go out there, you know kind of what you're looking for, something that's wrapped up and long and, maybe a little weird looking. It's like, okay, well, not what I'm looking for, so I don't bother with it.
Right. So, but I guess before we move on from some of the childhood stuff, I'd love to hear what are some of your fondest memories growing up with Arthur?
Well, some of it was time spent with him alone when he'd be flying someplace and I'd be the only one in the plane. I would say one regret I have was that he used to own 3 B-25 Mitchell bombers, and I never got to go in the air in any of those. I remember roaming around through the planes on the tarmac at the airport, but my brother got to fly in them, but I never did. I remember specifically some times in the cars, and I say in the planes with him, and he'd actually let me fly the plane a little bit at a young age just to let me have that experience. And later on, I did solo, but that was many years after that.
All right, so you're a fully fledged pilot now, are you? You could fly a plane now?
Well, not legally. I never did bother to get a pilot's license. One of my real issues with that is I'm a good part colorblind. And they really get mad if you try to land the plane at night on the taxiway. And the only way to tell is the color of the lights. So, and when you land on a taxiway, they might have all those planes, parked in your way too. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem indeed. So I see why that'd be a challenge for you. So I wanted to talk about, I guess, get into some of the business stuff, learn more about Nautilus. One of the things that wasn't clear to me reading the book is how did Arthur Jones make his first money? Because I know he went, bankrupt and lost money numerous times, but what was his first kind of entrepreneurial endeavor that took off?
That I'm not 100% certain on. I know that previous to Nautilus, he had imported wild animals from Africa, from South America and different countries. He also had been involved in making motion pictures and television. So that might have been his first really big gig as far as acquiring a fortune to some degree, though it was never a large fortune. He had the TV show Wild Cargo, and he also had a small zoo outside of Slidell, which is near New Orleans, and that was called Wild Cargo. So that, I would say, would probably be his first really successful, decent money-making venture. And after that, he abandoned the B-25s that he had been flying the animals in, and he abandoned the zoo, and that's when we moved to Africa in about the mid 1960s. So,
yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. So after that, when he moved to Africa, he had an agreement with the government there, the Union of South Africa. So we went from the USA to the USA. And he had an agreement with them as far as capturing the animals and exporting them. And we actually did send a batch of elephants from South Africa to the United States. But unfortunately, the government over there was pretty much like the government everywhere, and they're crooked as all heck. And they did not do what they were supposed to do, and they ended up cheating him. So he then left South Africa, made a deal with the Rhodesian government. We moved to Salisbury, and same damn deal. They turned around being a bunch of crooks and wouldn't honor their deal, and we returned to the United States virtually penniless.
Yeah, I remember reading that and feeling just reading that just irritated me, because that must have been so frustrating at the time. So, when you came back to the US, what happened then in terms from a business perspective? How did Arthur then get things off the ground?
Well, when we first arrived back in the States, we stayed with a friend of his, a guy named Ralph Demers. And then we moved to, Ralph lived in Miami. From there, we went to Kissimmee. That's where Eliza had her relatives, so we stayed with them. And he managed to scrabble together some money. And with that, he then was able to complete the one film he could bring back from Africa. He sold that to ABC for, I believe, around $50,000. And I think it was called Operation Elephant when it was broadcast, but don't hold me to that title for sure. Sure. As I understand, ABC got very good ratings with the show, and they probably made a lot more than $50K off of it. But that then gave him some seed money, and we were able to go from there.
And I guess that would have been quite a bit of money back then as well, like relative to the time.
That would have been about, say, 1968 approximately.
Right. Okay. So what would you put that in today's money if you had to guess? I have no idea.
Oh, let's see. I have to do some quick math. Let's see. If you double that and double it again, that might be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 in today's cash. But that's a swag.
Yeah, that's fine. No, that's obviously good for Arthur for being able to bring that footage back and sell that. That was obviously a huge help. So I do want to circle back talking about the animals, because the animals fascinate me. But I want to talk about some of the business stuff regarding Nautilus. One of the things that really astounded me reading the book was, when you were coming up with some of the mechanisms to drive the Nautilus machines. I know that you were kind of using pulleys at one point, and Gary and Arthur were arguing about what would be the best way to do it, the best mechanism. And it's my understanding that Gary actually had the idea for the cam and then eventually convinced your father to use that. And obviously that was an enormous innovation on Nautilus. I mean, that's what enabled you to, have these incredible variable strength resistance curves, and it's obviously Nautilus is known for having these cams. So is that something that a lot of people don't know? I mean, in your mind that Gary actually was responsible for that, or are we giving Gary too much credit on that? Was it just his seed idea, and then Arthur then innovated on that?
Well, it's probably a combination of the two, because I remember the incident very well where we were sitting at the dining room table at the house in Lake Helen, and Arthur was discussing using different size, let's call it chain rings, if you think of a 10-speed bicycle. And the idea would be to start off on the small chain ring and then move up to the next size, et cetera. And Gary is the one who did say, why not use a cam? So in that respect, does Gary deserve some credit? Damn right he does. I've never denied that. Gary and I don't get along, but that's a different side story. So Arthur and Gary had argued about it, and as I say in the book, Arthur finally agreed with Gary to try it that way. And I pointed out at the time that Gary, who was wearing no shirt, the answer had been staring them in the face, because Gary had at the time a belly button that protruded kind of in the shape of a spiral. So they said the answer was, staring you in the face all the time.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and that did make me laugh. And I thought that was the original inspiration behind the brand name Nautilus. But then I come to understand that was actually that came out of the cross-sectional area of the cam. That was almost came from that. So I got it the other way around. Now, one of the things that really made me laugh reading the book is Arthur would get complaints occasionally from people who put on so much muscle mass from using his kit that they couldn't fit in their clothes and would try and charge Nautilus for the new clothes. Is that, how often would you get complaints like that?
I don't remember how often we got them. I do remember the specific one from the dentist who complained that he had to buy new smocks or whatever it was, that the dentist wears over his clothing. And he wanted Arthur to have to pay for it because he had put on so much mass. But I think it had been kind of a halfway joke when the guy sent the letter. But Arthur carried that letter around with him for years to show it to people because he was quite proud that had occurred. And to him, it was quite funny. Yeah. So I know there were others, but I couldn't begin to give you a quantity of those.
That's all right. Yeah, I think that's probably the best marketing especially for incentivizing a hard gainer to purchase Nautilus that you could possibly think of. So what, one of the things I couldn't really get clear on, and again, you may not be, if you want to pass on this question, that's completely fine. But what were the sales figures at the very peak, or the revenue figures for Nautilus?
Well, I don't know them 100%. And if I did guess at them, it would be nothing but a guess. For years, I remember having quite a few numbers in my head, and I've been trying to purge them. I used to be able to quote chain links on machines, bolts, nuts, everything else. Oh. So, I can still give you the bank account numbers. So some things just don't leave you. But the sales figures, I don't really want to mention them. I will say at a guess, if pinned down, I'm sure we did over 40 million at sometimes. I'm sure we did a lot more than that. But Arthur would never release those figures, and frankly, I'm going to stay with his process of that, his way.
I respect that. And I remember he wasn't fond of giving people clubs to beat him with. It was his phrase, wasn't it? So, you mentioned in the book that you didn't think that Arthur was necessarily a great business person, but nonetheless a genius and a brilliant inventor. I'd love to hear what were, when you were working with Arthur, what did you think were his most admirable traits and skills that really, helped the business at the time?
Well, I would say his inventiveness, his determination. When he had an idea, everybody went to the shop, everybody started working, and you worked till you dropped, or you worked till it worked. And if you worked till you dropped and it hadn't worked yet, as soon as you got back up, you started working again. He would not give up on an idea without some massive, complete, absolute, total failure. And even then, he would readdress that problem later on. So he just had that drive to make it work, knowing that he could overcome pretty much any obstacle. And that's impressive because a lot of people, and I'll include myself in that, sometimes it gets so frustrating, you just walk away from it and you won't complete the task. Arthur very seldom would not complete the task.
Where does that drive come from, do you think?
I don't know for sure. I know that part of it may have been a case of his early childhood, and that's just being an armchair shrink to say something like that, because he had lived in the worst times. He'd lived at least partially during the Depression, and that's, that was not a fun time, I'm sure, in life. So he did not want to be poor. He wanted to succeed. He had to succeed in his own mind, and whatever it took to do. Nautilus was not his only invention. Of course, there was MedX, which came later, but even in the time when he was involved in capturing animals and doing photography, making motion pictures, he actually came up with other inventions, including a lens that he designed and had specifically built for his own use.
In terms of some of the business mistakes that are made at Nautilus, I'd love to hear you kind of elaborate on what were some of the things that, Arthur Jones made mistakes on in terms of running the business that kind of later came back to really, bite him.
Well, the the boondoggle of trying to build this giant alligator crocodile set inside of the large building behind the original factory. That was, I don't know how much money was spent on that without sitting down and trying to remember the figures. The building the empire, as I call it, in Ocala, the giant runway, getting the airplanes, the 707s there, that cost millions of dollars. He just continually wanted to impress people. He had a desire, I guess, to be the top dog, the cock of the walk, the big man on campus, whatever you want to call it, so that he was the number one person. And no matter what it took to do that, that's what he would do. And it's fine and dandy to have people look up at you, but when you're spending so damn much money that you're damn near bankrupting the business, that presented a bit of a problem.
Yeah. So you think it was pride that drove him?
Oh, I don't know if pride's the right word. I could perhaps think of a few others. Hubris comes to mind in some ways, but I've had arguments with people on the meaning of that word. But pride, hubris, a number of things like that. He had to be the top dog, and he would not settle for anything less. Now, mind you, in his own mind and in a lot of ways, in actual fact, he was the top dog. But I think he could have been the top dog without spending so darn much money and wasting so much money.
You know, he did so much for, you could say, for mankind. You know, he added so much value. You know, his inventions, with regard to the Nautilus and the MedX machines, have obviously gone on to inspire the designs for so many machines that came after that, and some of the ones that come out today. But you never get the feeling when you watch Arthur Jones on TV or on YouTube now, that he really gave a shit about people. But I think that that deep inside, and maybe you know this far better than I, he does really care. So I'd love to hear, did you experience much in the way of compassion from Arthur in terms of, and do you think that was really a driving force in what he did day to day in his business?
Well, he did care. He understood what he had come up with. He understood about the proper way to exercise, and that was based upon not just Nautilus, but his own personal experiences from before Nautilus. His first machine, I think he mentioned in his own bio, was built, I'm going to say somewhere around the Tulsa area, and that was at some YMCA. But he wanted people to benefit from his inventions. Now, he wasn't going to suffer fools. He damn sure would not suffer a fool in any way, shape, or form. But he understood that with what he had come up with, people could improve their lives, improve their health. And he also understood that most people just refuse to listen, refuse to learn. They, unfortunately, once they learn something bad, they tend to stay with it. And no matter how good of a mousetrap you build, the old style is still better because that's what people think and believe. So he's kind of, I think of him sometimes as a Don Quixote, that he would continue to strive against the windmill, which is the way people are, that their stance of not moving forward. And even though he knew he was Don Quixote, he would never acknowledge it. And he would continue to strive to change people. And he just would not accept it. Yeah. And sometimes it was just it was worthless to do the effort because it's just not going to succeed.
Do you ever think that if Arthur took a step back and maybe showed a little bit more compassion in that particular context, in terms of like educating people on exercise, for example, and maybe tried to seek an understanding of why people think the way they do, that he would have made more progress? Or do you think he very quickly thought, you know what, there's no way. This is a fool's errand trying to educate this specific group of people because they're just not receptive. And, I just wondered how much he got into in his own way,
Well, I think that if he had been a little less acerbic, I think might be the word to use, less brash perhaps in his approach, when you come out and make the comment, bodybuilders are the dumbest group of people I ever met with, until I started working with doctors, and then they're the dumbest group. And then I started working with physical therapists, and they're the dumbest group. And he would continue on and just repeat this over and over again. People tend to not like being told that they're the dumbest group of people you've ever met. So that's why I say a little less acerbic. I think he might perhaps have been received better. And I know there's a number of people from articles I've read and things I've seen and heard that they would never want anything to do with Nautilus or with Arthur because of those comments he made. So would he have been more widely accepted, perhaps better listened to? I think so, but that's an opinion. You can't change the past.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think Arthur's still right about a lot of those groups. There's certainly a lot of individuals in those groups today that still seem to be very ignorant around a lot of the stuff they shouldn't be ignorant about. When I'd love to hear when Arthur saw Nautilus and started MedX, and obviously you went across to MedX to work with him. What were some of the key changes that were implemented that came from mistakes that you learned from in Nautilus, if anything?
Well, when he originally started MedX, he did not want to have any kind of distributorships like he had with Nautilus, because he considered some of the problems were caused by having the distributors. Another thing he did was MedX actually consisted of two separate entities, two separate companies. There was the MedX company itself, our corporation, but the manufacturing was actually done by a separate corporation. Kind of I don't know if that was a case more of trying to legally protect assets. It may have been. And that was run by Clay Steffi and his wife, Kathy. So he did not actually run that company, though he oversaw it to a degree. And, of course, the money was funneled to them for the manufacturing. The problem, of course, with distributors or not having distributors was to get the equipment out there. And eventually, to a degree, we had people that were involved with that. And then we ended up also getting into I don't know if you want to call it financing, might be the term, but there were people that would lease the equipment. So we were involved with companies that were doing that. And that ended up being a whole different set of issues.
Right. Okay. So you had a new sort of business model, and but you encountered new problems. Could you elaborate on those and how you perhaps overcame those?
Well, I don't know that we ever actually overcame them, which is why MedX ended up eventually getting sold. Arthur, of course, getting older did not help. And of course, Arthur continued his ways of being very acerbic. I remember that one of the first customers that flew in, Arthur had sent the plane up to Staten Island, and I believe it was memory serves, it was a Dr. McAllister. So the doctor walks into the ballroom, and this is going to be crude. So
go for it.
He walks into the ballroom, and Arthur says, "If you didn't fucking come here to learn any fucking thing, you're wasting my fucking time and yours, and you can get back on a fucking plane and fly back." And I might not have exact word for word, but it was almost exactly that phrase. He bought equipment. The guy came in and bought equipment. And you hear Arthur say this to this gentleman who just flew in, who's a doctor, and you're thinking, Arthur, you've just blown the sale. But the guy bought equipment. So, were his ways of treating customers the best? Well, I don't think the people at Google or IBM or anybody else would talk like that to their customers. Arthur did.
I wonder, though, if it's like some people just love that, that frank, to the point, honest, authentic, brash, reaction, because there's a lot of people that are, in business that are fake and inauthentic. And yes, they might be polite, but they, often smiling through their teeth. So were there select individuals, clearly maybe this individual, who just, that brash approach resonated with them?
Well, it may very well have. Obviously, with Dr. McAllister, it did work. I know with others it did not, because like I say, I've read articles, I've seen comments made by others that they want nothing to do with Arthur and will totally besmirch him. And no matter what happens, they could literally see examples from Arthur that showed they were wrong, and they refused to accept it. What can you do with people like that?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about the animals. And I wanted to fact check this with you. One of the things that gets thrown around all the time is how he obviously captured a large number of animals, but shot, by his own admission, 630 elephants and 63 men, and said that he regretted the elephants more. Is it true that he shot 63 men? Can you confirm or deny that?
Well, I wasn't there for any of the ones he actually killed. I was around a few times when he did use his gun. I know of one guy specifically he pistol whipped in front of the factory at Lake Helen. That guy had it coming. He was offering drugs to my brother, so
yeah, I remember reading
had a strong stance on that. But as to whether or not he actually killed 63, that's what he claimed. I know that there was I don't know if the hit squad would be the right term, but at least 2 or 3 hitmen that were sent after him in Africa who somehow never made it back to the United States. And I know of other instances he talked about, but he would never, shall we say, brag about doing this. It was just a case of he had to kill them for whatever reason at the time he did. And it was just a matter of fact. And why discuss it?
Yeah, fair enough. One of the Colorado experiment is obviously a very controversial experiment and study with Casey Viator as the bodybuilder in that one. And served as obviously a huge inspiration to people too, in terms of trying out high intensity training and trying to pursue maximal hypertrophy in their training. One of the controversies around it is a lot of people feel that Casey was on some kind of steroid. I know that Casey's denied that himself. And I know that obviously Arthur Jones was incredibly against any kind of drug, as you've said there. I'd love to hear your own thoughts about, do you think there's any chance that Arthur or Casey would have used steroids in order to enhance the results from that study, or do you think that's completely bogus?
It would be bogus that they would have used any kind of steroids. Arthur's stance against steroids was very clear. He also mentioned that people taking steroids don't quite understand how the biology of your body works, your physiology. That if you take steroids, you basically have inside you, let's call it a little steroid factory that's supposed to produce steroids. So if you start taking steroids, your system says, well, we have too many steroids, so let's close the factory down, or at least have it produce less. So taking a bunch of steroids is not going to help you. People think it will. Now, if you're low on steroids, let's say you should have a quantity of 100 and your body's only producing 80, then you should take 20. I don't know what the actual values are. But if your body is working properly, all you do by taking steroids is cause the steroid factory in your body to stop working. And if you take them too long, the factory goes completely out of business and will never start again. It also affects your gonads. They will shrink. It'll affect your ability to have any fun with your girlfriend. So take steroids if you want to, people. But when you can't get it up, don't blame me. Arthur was right on things like that. And people he talked to, that I know of, particularly he talked to Sergio Oliva about steroids. And when he explained this to him, you could see the eyes light up in Sergio. He understood what Arthur was talking about. So, Arthur or Casey taking steroids never happened.
Oh, okay. I completely agree in terms of the consequences of steroids, and one reason why I would never consider it. You made me think there. You mentioned Sergio. You've been around some incredibly impressive bodybuilders and muscular people in your time. Who stood out as having kind of the most impressive physique from memory for you?
Well, I've never thought about that particular question. Sergio was impressive. Of course, Casey saw Arnold, but only briefly when he came by for the one visit along with Franco Colombo. But, if I had to guess between those three, I don't know if I'd go with Sergio or Arnold or Casey. They were all three impressive in their own way. I think perhaps Casey was shorter than the other two. And I know Arnold's fairly tall. And like I say, any of those three were very impressive. I've seen some people and pictures of people that look more massive, but I think now people are taking, what are they called, growth hormones or some other things. And I don't even know. I have no idea what the side effects of those are going to be to these people. And to me, they are actually looking too much like biological freaks.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a big fan of the modern bodybuilder look. I think this is a good opportunity to quickly talk about the Frankenstein piece that you put in the book about Arnold and Franco. So do you want to just talk about that quickly?
Yeah, Arthur had wanted to do a remake of the Frankenstein story, and he was going to have Arnold play the part of the Frankenstein monster. And he was going to have Franco put inside of a coffin that was designed to break apart. Arnold would have carried the coffin, and he was in strong enough shape to have done this, walking down the road and at some point throw the coffin to the ground in disgust, and Franco would burst out of the coffin as it came apart. So he could, of course, he could never work with Arnold, and I don't think he could work with Franco either, but he always joked about wanting to do that particular scene, knowing that Arnold was capable of doing it without any wires, without any special props or anything except for the break apart coffin. And he regretted that. That was one of the two movies he wanted to make that he regretted not having the chance to do.
Yeah, and then of course Arnold went on to have a incredible film career, and did you say Franco played Frankenstein in a show? Is that correct? No, sorry.
No. Franco played the Incredible Hulk, which I always thought was funny.
Sorry, that's it. Yeah,
because the Hulk was a very large creation. So when Baxter would change into the Hulk, of course, Franco would come in and play the part there. But in the comic books, the Hulk was not a short guy, and Franco's a short guy. The Hulk would have been probably closer, perhaps 8 to 10 feet tall. So having a short guy play the part of the Hulk was kind of a funny little thing, I always thought.
Absolutely. So transitioning back to the animals for a moment, Arthur imported some incredible selections of animals, from all around the world, or mostly from Africa, perhaps. And you had some serious close calls that you talk about in the book. I mean, can you talk about some of the kind of most hairy situations that you or your family got in with some of these animals?
Well, I know that when Arthur had the zoo in Slidell, the wild cargo zoo, that he got bitten by a lion, which was fortunately it didn't kill him, but I think it frapped up his neck pretty bad. And he always had neck problems after that. He couldn't turn his head quite right. And I know that in the family, at times we had different pets. We had at one point living in our house in Slidell, we had a jaguar, a jaguarundi, and an ocelot. I got along with two of the three, which ain't bad. But the jaguarundi always considered me lunch for some reason. Got along great with most other people. So I was never happy when we came back from Africa and we had the jaguarundi living inside the house with us. Because when he saw me, it was dinner time, our lunch time, our breakfast time, our snack time. It didn't matter. It was time to bite me. Never fond of that particular animal. I know that Arthur got bitten numerous times. Numerous times by rattlesnakes. He never took anti-venom. He treated it the old-fashioned way, cut, suck, and bind the wound a little bit, and he was fine. He was very much against the use of anti-venom. In fact, I know we had close calls. He would have had a lot more than me, of course, because he spent so much time in the bush with quite a few different types of animals. So I don't know that Gary or Yaya being Eva, my sister, I don't know that they ever had any particular encounters that I can remember with any of the wild animals getting after them. When we had the jaguar in Slidell, Eliza got mauled by it. we at that point, instead of living in the house, it was living in a cage, and she was trying to feed it, and it reached out a little too far, and fortunately she didn't lose anything but some skin and some blood, but it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. And then of course you had Jack the crocodile, and you had the responsibility of cleaning the pen, right?
Jack was an alligator. Jack was an alligator, one-eyed Jack. And while that wasn't always my responsibility, we had Ralph Kramer working for us at that time, but Ralph was either on vacation or wherever, so I had to go in there one time and clean the pool, which was a normal process. We would have to drain the concrete pool for him, and it was a very small enclosure. I say small, not 10 by 10, but let's call it 40 or 50 by approximately the same. And there was a large tree in the middle of it with an iron railing around it. So you didn't have a lot of room with a 10, 12-foot alligator that if something went wrong and he started chasing you. Now, so I had one time I said to go in and have to clean that pen, and Arthur's advice to me was, if he starts chasing you, zigzag. Because alligators corner like a battleship or an aircraft carrier. More like an aircraft carrier. They don't turn worth the darn. So you get them going in a straight line, and then you turn 90 degrees, and by the time they turn, you're way ahead of them. But when you've only got 40 to 50 feet to run in, and part of that's taken up by a large tree, and part of it's taken up by a large pool, how far can you run? So I wasn't happy about that, but Jack didn't bother me, fortunately. So I'm still here with all 10 of each.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Surely how long would it take you to clean the pool?
It wouldn't take too long. You'd go and once you drained it, then you go in there and you have your scrub brush, nice large scrub brush, and just get all the gunk out and make sure you rinse it out good and stop it up and start filling up again with water and get the hell out of there before the alligator decides it's mealtime.
Yeah, and when you just have one eye on the alligator the entire time as well.
Yeah, pretty much you would, and you had other people watching you, so you kind of felt like you're you're now part of the exhibit, and you're hoping that if you're not watching the alligator enough, someone bothers to yell at you.
Yeah, I just think that's absolutely crazy. You wouldn't find me anywhere near a situation like that. Because even in zoos today, they would put the alligator in a separate enclosure while they clean the thing, right?
Yeah. Well, of course, most zoos would have more than one, so you wouldn't want to be in there with a bunch. But still, it's kind of an unsettling feeling to be in there, knowing that if something goes wrong, your only chance is to hope you can run fast enough and don't slip.
Well, you're not scared.
Oh, I was scared. I was I was keeping an eye and a half on the alligator. So, and which of course slows down your cleaning process because you're not paying attention. So you're in there longer.
That's it. So I remember seeing videos of is it Mickey the gorilla? Have I got that right?
Yes, Mickey was the gorilla.
Yeah, on the pullover machine. So
yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. Why did you have him on certain machines, and how did that all happen?
Well, I was not involved in that particular shoot in any way, but Arthur decided that it would be a good form of advertising. And if you've got these animals, part of the expense of them, it can be offset by, well, you're using the animal for experimental purposes, and are you using it in advertising? So you can justify the expense. Think about that.
Creative.
If you've got a helicopter, you want to make sure you're able to write it off for business expenses for your taxes. So here you go. How do we write off Mickey? Well, let's use him in an ad. So exactly what he did. So they drugged Mickey up. I don't know who the heck would get close enough to stick a gorilla with a hypodermic, but it ain't going to be me. I'll tell you that. And they drugged him up, put him in the machine, and they have Terry standing there next to it. So it's like Mickey is using the pullover machine. And apparently they didn't drug him quite enough as far as Terry was concerned, because at some point Mickey started moving around and making noises. And I believe there's one of the pictures where she's looking at him with a little askance, shall we say, like, oh, damn, he's going to come out of that machine and come after me.
So was he drugged up so much that he couldn't really exhibit any unusual strength on the machine?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he would not have known how to use the machine to begin with. It was just a case of, I say, using him for purposes of the advertising.
Got it.
And it's a very memorable ad if you think about it.
Oh,
People,
yeah. Well,
think
clearly.
of that things.
Yeah. I just wondered, I mean, I can imagine that a gorilla would be able to do a full stack, no problem, on practically any machine. Probably break the damn thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you think about it, a gorilla could peel you like a banana if he wanted to.
Wow.
So can you can obviously do a chin with two hands. Can
Yes.
you do a chin with one hand?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
Can you chin your body weight with your little pinky?
Definitely not.
Well, gorillas can do things like that. So yeah. Like I say, if they decide they want to peel you like a banana, well, you're not. Your odds of living through that are not very good.
Yeah, they're incredible creatures. Any other stories that come to mind with regard to the animals that you guys had, and anything that comes to mind around that you want to share? Well,
I know that Arthur, way back in the 1950s, had captured a large number of alligators that he ended up spreading across different zoos and attractions in the United States. Some of those had ended up at the California alligator farm. And these animals, so caught in the 50s, later on, Arthur acquired them back from the California alligator farm when they went out of business. And he brought them from California, or took them from California, and brought them here to Ocala on the giant estate there. When he did, he then started feeding them properly. Now, these animals had been 30 or plus years in California not growing. When he fed them properly, they started growing again. What is the lifespan of an alligator or crocodile? Nobody knows for sure. Fed properly, who knows how long they could live? They could be like giant tortoises that live perhaps hundreds of years. So when you hear or read about the lifespan of an animal, it's based upon what they are in the wild, but in captivity, animals live a hell of a lot longer.
Right, of course, because they can get access to regular food. They're not prey to other animals. So that's the I guess the main reason why their lifespans can be much longer, I suppose.
Yeah, and as far as keeping wild cats and things like that for pets, I've had the experience, and frankly, Scarlett, I would not do it again. But it was nice to have had that experience. It's something most people can't claim. If you've never really woken up until you've had a jaguar lying in bed with you start licking you with their tongue, you wake up.
Yeah, you said it's like sandpaper, right?
Oh, yes. It's like, oh, yeah. You don't forget that.
Lovely. Good stuff. All right. So I want to talk about, I guess, some of the relationships involved in the story. One of the people you mentioned who I've had on the show a couple of times and met in person, lovely man, Jim Flanagan.
Right.
I'd love to hear, you say some really lovely things about Jim in the book, and I'd just love to hear, your thoughts about Jim and some of your experiences with him.
Well, Jim's a very intelligent man. He's one of the ones that Arthur really liked because he could learn. He would listen and become educated. That impressed Arthur. Jim is a very, as a large, decently large man. Excuse me. So I don't remember my first encounter with Jim. I remember one of my second or thirds where I know that he had purchased some equipment and needed repair, and I was sent down to his facility to repair that equipment. And later on, of course, he began working with Arthur at Nautilus, and then later on worked with Arthur at MedX. So Jim, as I say, he's kind of a rare individual. He really wants to help people, and he really is willing to learn. And it's a combination that is very rare, I believe, in humanity.
Yeah, I very much got that feeling when I spoke to him on the show a couple of times and in person. He comes across so genuine and does really care about helping others. And that's why, I know you've got a bit of a stigma towards salespeople there, William. And, Jim was the only, I think, salesperson you met who you ever really liked. Is that correct?
That's correct. We had a guy working for him named Ed Farnham, and Ed and I did not ever get along and would never get along. And if I go later on in life, I've learned more about Ed that it made him even less appealing, but that gets into politics, and that's not the point of this show.
Yeah, fair enough. And going back to Jim for a second, I think it's a testament to how, if you talk to Jim, you can see that he's a wonderful salesperson, because he doesn't come across like he's trying to coerce you into a decision. Not that we've ever been in a position where he's trying to sell me anything, but I could never imagine him trying to do that. And I imagine him being someone very, very easy to buy from. And that's because I've got the reason I'm passionate about this, William, is I've got a background in sales. So before I, ventured off doing my own business, I was selling IT solutions to businesses for almost 10 years. Wow. And I had a very different approach to your typical salesperson. I wasn't pushy in the traditional kind of sense, and I know exactly what you mean the way you describe some of the salespeople that work for Arthur, and Jim sounds like the type of salesperson I aspire to be, which is very cool. I just wanted to, I guess, touch on Arthur Jones' relationship with Terry for a moment. I'm just curious, I know obviously it didn't end up working out. What exactly happened between Terry and AJ at the end?
Well, one of the things was Terry had an affair, and I think I know the name she had, but I'm going to leave that one to let people guess about. So Arthur kind of had the traditional, I guess, chauvinistic stance, shall we say, of it's okay for the man to cheat, but not for the woman to cheat. So when he found out about her cheating, that kind of finally put the final nail in the coffin. Terry had extreme spending habits. She spent a lot of money that Arthur didn't know about till later. And that made things even worse when he found out about the affair. So between the two, that is what caused the breakup, the final breakup. Terry was Arthur's greatest mistake. I say that in the book, and I mean it. It worked out personally for me, which is a strange thing. It's one of those things, I guess you think about they call it the butterfly wing effect, causing a hurricane someplace else. So if Arthur doesn't meet Terry, he doesn't get divorced from Liza, perhaps. And the net effect is I end up, because of all that I ended up being the sole heir. Otherwise, Liza would have gotten what Arthur had when he died. So it worked out personally for me, but it was still Arthur's greatest mistake. And I would much rather that had never occurred, that he'd never met her. It was just a disaster of relationship. I've been told other things about her that, being as her hearsay, I'm not going to repeat. This things that she did, I say, as far as the money and things she did there, I'm aware of some of those, and I'm sure a lot of it I never knew about. Just when I had to clean out her closet, it was filled with clothes, still price tags attached, never worn, never used. And I would say tens and tens of thousands of dollars worth of clothing, things like that. It's just wasteful.
Yeah. Remind me, Eliza wasn't your biological mother, was she?
Correct. My biological mother was named Eva.
Right.
And that was Arthur's, third wife. Then Eva was followed by Liza, but Liza and Arthur were together for many years before they actually married. They married during the Nautilus years, but they had been together before for a number of years. And then Liza was followed by Terry, and then Terry was followed by Inga Topperwing. So, and she was the last wife, and she predeceased Arthur.
And it sounds like from reading the book that Liza was really pivotal and so supportive during the tough times, and certainly during the start of Nautilus. She was very much involved, and it sounded like she worked very hard to help. Is that correct?
That is correct. And when Arthur sold Nautilus, Liza got a percentage of that sale.
All right. Okay. So she did get something out of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, again, you don't have to necessarily answer this question, William, but being the sole heir, I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know how his remaining wealth would be distributed. So you've obviously done fairly well. Like, have you been in a position where you didn't necessarily have to? I know you've had various jobs, but you didn't necessarily have to work if you didn't want to.
Well, not exactly. Arthur did not die with a very large estate. I know that people, Arthur, excuse me, Arthur at one time was the number 400 on the Forbes list of 400 richest people in the world, or in the United States, whichever one it was. But Arthur never really was worth what people estimated he was. The Forbes list, that was based upon the assumed value of Nautilus, which was based upon assumed sales volume. And there's a lot of assumption going on. And you know what they say about assuming things. Right. So Arthur did not die with a vast fortune. People assumed that Arthur was probably worth in the neighborhood of 10 million or more. Well, that's, to say the least, an extremely exaggerated figure. I'm not going to give numbers, but it was not a case of hey, I'm going to go out and buy myself a yacht. No. So I've continued to work some in different capacities. Say as I've said, and as you said, I think I've done some photography. Just recently released the Nautilus book plus a science fiction book, and it's a case of, yes, if I really was careful and lived a real small life, yes, I could retire on what I inherited from Arthur. But it's not a case of, hey, I'm fabulously wealthy and I can do any darn thing I want. No, not even close.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And, I remember in the book you talk about how Arthur saw money as a tool, and he'd always, quote unquote, reinvest the money into all sorts of things. We all know about the planes and the animals and the women and so on and so forth. So yeah, I in a way, I kind of respect that. I know obviously it may have been, I don't know, you could debate this, whether it'd be good or bad for you to inherit a lot more. But in a way, it's I kind of like that perspective he had on money, where it's like, money's just a tool. It's just energy to be transferred into the next thing to be able to, I don't know, grow this business or go and do this thing I really want to do. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yes, it does. And that's the way Arthur treated it. It's the way he treated a lot of things. Arthur would, if it came time to work on a machine, Arthur would go and work on the machine, and it didn't matter what he was wearing. He didn't think about it. And I've kind of inherited that attitude. I have to, the wife kind of yells at me, hey, change out of your good clothes, and if you're going to go mow the lawn, don't wear the fancy stuff. So it's a way of, I guess, when you have to do something, you just go and do it. Arthur didn't think about how much money it would take to do it. He would go do it. He didn't think about what he was wearing. He would just go do it. And I appreciate that attitude. I've inherited some of it, and I have to physically, so to speak, slap myself upside the head and say, hey, before you do this, go do that. So it's just a different approach, I guess.
Yeah, I know. I respect it, because I think so many people have such a fearful relationship with money. And he clearly didn't. He clearly just saw, that there's a will, there's a way. And that's very, very inspiring. Before we kind of wrap up, William, is there anything else you want to mention about Arthur Jones that we didn't touch on? Anything at all that you feel is important for the audience to know about? Well, a
couple of things I've always regretted with Arthur. I'll be blunt. Some of them, my stupid things I did. For instance, before he died, I really wish I had recorded him. Arthur used to tell a lot of stories, and I mentioned that in the book. When you're going through working with him every day and he's telling these stories over and over again, they got repetitive. But I really wish before he had died that I had recorded these stories, because they're now lost. And he talks about some of them in his book, but it would be nice to have that voice recording, to hear him again. You miss that. I think most people miss that with their relatives when they're gone. The other thing is, Arthur will never get the scientific credit that I believe he deserved. He'll never win the Nobel, even if, of course, it would have to be posthumous at this point. but with the amount of stuff he did with Nautilus, the amount of stuff he did with MedX, he deserved probably at least 2 Nobels. He'll never get nominated. He'll never win. And it's just, you feel he got cheated by the scientific community. And I understand too why that is. It's because he probably mentioned somewhere along the line that scientists are the stupidest group of people he ever met. So, in a way, his acerbic attitude bit him in the ass there. And,
sorry, go on.
So to me, he did a lot of good for the world, and I'm happy he did it. I mean, it helped my life down as it now stands. But like anybody else, I guess, to wrap it up, I would say that I'm his son. I miss him. And I think any good child to their parent would miss them when they're gone. And sometimes it's difficult. Just think back to the way he was, and his death bothered me so much just because of the way it happened that I would have accepted if he died in a plane crash, got mauled by an animal and died in a gun battle. I could have accepted that so much better than just watching him slowly die like that. And that just, to me, was no way to die. He should have gone out in a blaze of glory. That's the way I think about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. What is just so that listeners can get this if they want to? What's the name of his biography that he wrote?
Okay, the name of the book is Nautilus: The Lost Empire of Arthur Jones. Yeah. It is available on Amazon for Kindle, and if you want, there's a website, and I know it's a strange name, but it's frozensleep.com. And the reason for that is because of my science fiction book, The Tales of Frozen Sleep. So I'm known as the son of Arthur, but I'd also like to be known as somebody who's done stuff of my own, and that's the reason for that particular title.
Sure. And you also mentioned his own Arthur Jones biography that he wrote as well.
Right.
What's the name of that one?
That's called And God Laughs. And actually, I'm thinking of probably taking that book and I'm going to say reorder it. And what I mean by that is shuffle the chapters, because the book he wrote, And God Laughs, is not in chronological order. And I think sometimes it makes it a more difficult read. So I've thought about, as I say, shuffling the chapters, putting them into chronological order, and reissuing the book. I guess people could write me, send an email or go to my website and send me an email and let me know what they think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage the listeners to do that. And I will just say, I've read Nautilus: The Lost Empire of Arthur Jones, and I think that the listeners of this show will absolutely love the book. Would love your perspective, someone who's really kind of behind the scenes and saw all of the details of Arthur's life and businesses and so forth. Super entertaining, informative, and very well written. Actually, I found it quite easy to read. One thing I will say, and just to provide a disclaimer here, is there is some very controversial content, which is probably no surprise, and related to things like race, religion, politics, womanizing, etc. And I just want to say that up front in case, so people are prepare for that if they do decide to buy it and read it. The irony of me saying that is obviously that will probably, intrigue people even more, and it may fly off the shelves, and there's so much good stuff in there that I hope that is the case. But yeah, I just wanted to say that in case, people get, I guess, too easily offended by certain things these days. So there you go. William, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate you. There's so many more things we could have talked about, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Lawrence, and probably the first time I called about your name here. And writing the book, as I say, it took me years actually after I finished it to release the book. I put my soul into that, and bearing your soul like that, to me, it was difficult. Arthur was the showman. I was the guy behind the curtain. I'm not saying that I operated Arthur or anything like that. No, not even close. But like Oz, I was the guy behind the curtain, but Arthur was the real Oz. And most people who met me probably didn't even know who the heck I was. And at times I made sure that they didn't. I went out of my way to be that. So for me to come out in public like this is kind of goes against my nature. I tend to be what I call asocial. And it's an actual word. I didn't know that. I thought I had coined the phrase, but I looked it up and it actually exists. So I say it was an experience to live it. And MedX, in a way, was actually living it again. As to whether or not that book ever gets written, I don't know. I've only had maybe 2 or 3 people request that. So we'll have to see if that occurs.
I imagine it will after this gets published. And, for everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode, please go to highintensitybusiness.com/lost-empire or lost-empire. And for all episodes, please go to highintensitybusiness.com/podcast. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Discover how to achieve your health and fitness goals, become a great personal trainer, and build a successful, high-intensity training business. Check out highintensitybusiness.com. highintensitybusiness.com.